Welcome to Fear and Greed, the week ahead. I'm Sean Aylmer, and as always, I'm joined by economist Stephen Koukoulas. You'll find him at thekouk.com, TheKouk.com, and on X using the handle thekouk. Stephen, good morning.
And a very good morning. We're halfway through a fortnight of blockbusting news last week and probably equally blockbusting news in this week coming.
Yeah, so let's talk about last week. The national accounts were released. One thing that you economists love are the national accounts because it kind of tells you everything you need to know about the economy.
Yes, and generally the story was not good. I think by now everybody's probably read about how weak those numbers were. And rather than just the quarterly number, even though that was quite bad at 0.3, the annual figure was the one that hit most people between the eyes. 0.8% annual growth in GDP. Now, back in the day, like pre-pandemic, we used to get 0.8 per quarter. We're getting 0.8% growth in the economy in a year now, and that's really, really weak. And when you consider that population growth was somewhere around about 2.5% in the year to September, we had per capita GDP minus 1.5%. So the numbers, whichever way you cut them, were very weak. And the really fascinating part to us economists, again, or to me anyway, I won't speak for everybody, was that all of the growth, more than all of the growth, was coming from the public sector. So private sector demand was actually going backwards. So private sector things like business investment, household spending, net exports, those sorts of things. Government demand is government demand. It's employment of public services and building roads and defence equipment and all that sort of stuff. So without public sector spending, we would have not only had a per capita GDP recession, we would have had a recession. That's how close to the edge we are, and that's why the numbers were really very poor.
Jim Chalmers made the comment that the private sector needs to drive growth from here, and it's kind of obvious, but you wonder whether there's more to it, whether the private sector, we can't rely on government spending forever.
Correct. And this has been the missing link. And again, within those national accounts, as you said, there's so much information. The productivity numbers that were included within those were, again, pretty poor. No, they were poor, unambiguously. And so you get into that point about, well, why? Why is it so? When we've got all this artificial intelligence, we've got machinery, we've got technology, surely the use of machines is increasing our labour productivity. We're producing more per person working. One of the things, I think this is what Jim Chalmers was going on about, and as you said, he's right, but I don't know whether he's got the solution or anybody's got the solution, is that absence of business investment over a decade, not just the last 6 months, it's over a decade, means that investment in machinery and equipment and buildings and all this other stuff has not been as strong as it could have been, certainly a mile behind what's happened in the US.
Yeah.
So therefore, that productivity enhancement that we long for, that we wish for, isn't coming through. So we need the private sector to step up, and this probably gets into what we're going to talk about in fact, tomorrow, the RBA board meeting.
Yeah.
Is the private sector being held back by interest rates being too high? He asked rhetorically.
Yes. So what do you think the Reserve Bank will make of that data last week, and what do you think they'll do?
Yeah, look, I think they were surprised how weak it was. They're looking through their forecast. They just put out a month ago, the November statement on monetary policy had GDP growth lifting to 1.5% by the end of this year, and that is clearly going to undershoot. They're not going to get anywhere near that on these numbers underperforming. So I think they have to now acknowledge that, particularly given this private sector this week, private sector is interest rate sensitive. Government spending on defence and nurses and teachers, they don't care what interest rates are. They're going to spend that money regardless. Yeah. It's private sector that's really interest rate sensitive. So I think the RBA will probably, look, they're not going to move rates, I don't think. But I suspect that we're not ruling anything out will be dead and buried. They will rule out rate hikes. They will be flagging that what we, the RBA, need to see before we actually pull that trigger on a rate cut. So they won't be time specific. Michelle Bullock does not like forward guidance. She's not going to say, we're going to do it in February or April or May if this happens. She'll say that the preconditions for us to trim rates is more confirmation that inflation's falling, not just the headline figure, but the trimmed mean, possibly an uptick in that unemployment rate. And if growth remains soggy, that is when we will cut rates. So I think that's what they're going to do. They'll move to a dovish bias, as they say. And frankly, the market's already moved there. The money market's starting to price in a high probability of a cut in April and a roughly 50-50 chance of one in February.
It's kind of interesting that so many good economists, yourself included, have for months and months and months said that we expect a rate cut, if not now, early next year.
Yep.
That was definitely the consensus, and we're talking seriously good economists like yourself, Stephen.
Oh.
The Reserve Bank has been kind of pushing back on, or it has been pushing back on that for all good reason. But just when we were doing the hiking cycle, you wonder whether the Reserve Bank's a little bit behind the ball on the falling cycle.
You look, and I think that's not a bad analogy too, because again, I look at all my mates and my competitors, whatever, and yes, the vast bulk of them were saying probable cuts late 2024. This is going back 6 months,
yep.
And they've pushed them back, obviously, as the Reserve Bank has. So one of the things I think that we are looking at, again, I'll do the collective economists, is that a murder of economists or a gaggle or something anyway? They are now seeing what's happening in the global economy. The Fed's probably going to be cutting this week too. We had New Zealand recently cutting 50. Canada, we've gone through this. Canada, Europe, everyone and their dog is South Korea even, apart from their political turmoil, is actually cutting in the States as well. So we've got this global rate cutting cycle in play, and Australia is one of very few countries not playing the game at the moment. So these other countries don't have inflation spot on their target either, but they've got weak growth, rising unemployment, these sorts of things. So, that's why I think your comment, has the RBA behind the curve? Well, maybe. But if they are, well, there's a couple of things that can happen. They go cut the first 3 or 4 meetings of next year, or I wouldn't rule this out. I'm not ruling it in or out. Slam on a 50-point cut if the economy actually turns out to be a good deal weaker and inflation a good deal lower. But that's going to be driven by what we see in the data in the next month or two.
The other bit of data this week, which will be interesting, is employment figures.
Well, speaking of numbers that could change the thinking of the RBA and the markets and everybody else, labour market numbers, and we've had surprising resilience in employment growth and surprising stability in the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate was 4.1% at the beginning of the year. It's sort of bobbed up and down a bit, 4.1% at the moment. Look, I think the consensus is that we will finally get a little bit of an uptick in the unemployment rate because the GDP numbers are so weak. You've got to have firms not hiring as many people. So for the labour market numbers, all eyes on whether it's a weak number. If it is and we get, say, a shock increase in unemployment to 4.3, then the herd galloping towards rate cuts in February will become, a little bit louder.
Herdier.
That's
it.
Herds and murders and gaggles.
Stephen, enjoy the week. It sounds like you will.
I can't wait for all these things to happen. It'll be great.
That was economist Stephen Koukoulas, better known as The Kook. You can find him at thekook.com and follow him on X using the handle The Kook. I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is Fear and Greed, the week ahead.